It's really tough for people to define themselves as caregivers. And oftentimes people find themselves in caregiving situations where they're slowly taking on responsibilities. So they don't identify as fully stepping into that caregiver role. I think it's personally important to identify as a caregiver, but some people think that there's a little bit of a stigma with it too.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Rudiman, and this is Punk Rock HR. My guest today is Blair Whitman, VP of Client Success at Homethrive. They work with HR leaders to remove the stress, worry, and additional workload from the shoulders of family caregivers and the companies that employ them. I talked to Blair earlier this summer about how Homethrive adds real value to the workplace. Their platform supports caregivers, boosts productivity, and delivers meaningful benefits at a time when people need it most. This episode, it was recorded live, so you'll hear our energy and enthusiasm throughout. To learn more, visit homethrive.com, but for now, settle in, and here's my conversation with Blair Whitman on this week's Punk Rock HR. Blair, hello, and welcome to LinkedIn Live.
Thanks, Lori. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so pleased to have you here. Listen, before we talk about all things caregiving, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So caregiving has always been important to me. I come from a long line of caregivers. My mom caregave for my dad in ways that she donated a kidney to him. I've caregiven for my brother as he battled addiction, now 5+ years sober. And caregiving being intertwined with my life, came into my life a couple of years ago when I was approached by Homethrive to build out a client success department. And I thought, gosh, I've been in employee benefits my whole professional career. How did I not think about caregiving as a benefit? And the light went on. So I love to advocate for what we do and just building better workforces that focus on caregiving.
Well, before we get started talking about the issues that are really important to caregiving today, let's talk a little bit about Homethrive and Level Set, because they are our hosts today. So what exactly does Homethrive try to accomplish, and what problem does it solve in the marketplace?
Yep. Homethrive is a caregiving benefit from cradle to rocking chair. We help families and people navigate caregiving challenges. We help that in a digital format with a product that helps people navigate caregiving needs at any time of day. We also help with our social workers that help people navigate more complex solutions. We help people care for their children if it is getting an IEP in place, an individual education plan, and advocating for it, to partners that might be caring for somebody with a chronic condition or a new diagnosis. And then there is the big, ever-growing sandwich generation of people that are caregiving for not only children, but at the same time, their aging parents. And that's how we started out in our focus in caring for aging loved ones. And it is continuing to grow as the sandwich generation grows and as people are living longer lives and taking care of their families. And we also help people with the inevitable after loss support. So what happens when you lose somebody? How do you navigate that? And hopefully be, wholer, healthier people in not only their lives outside of work, but inside of work at the same time.
Well, I really appreciate you kind of grounding us in who you are and what you do. Listen, Blair, you used a phrase that I think is really important, overused and maybe not defined very well, which is caregiver. So can you tell us a little bit about what the word caregiver is and maybe what it isn't? Like, how do you define it?
Yeah, it's really tough for people to define themselves as caregivers. So I want to start there. Oftentimes you define yourself as being a good daughter, a good mother, a good friend, even a good neighbor, and helping, somebody that is aging, maybe take in their groceries or pick up groceries for them. And oftentimes people find themselves in caregiving situations where they're slowly taking on responsibilities. So they don't identify as fully stepping into that caregiver role. I think it's personally important to identify as a caregiver, but some people think that there's a little bit of a stigma with it too. They associate caregivers with paid. There are a lot of unpaid family caregivers out there. And, in people that might have a stigma with the word caregiver, I encourage them to think about how they are taking care of others, providing support. So there are different words that people can use. I think to take care of yourself, it's important to recognize that you are and have stepped into a caregiver role. What caregiving isn't, that's probably even harder to define. I look at what we do here at Homethrive and come into us for many of different things. I always love to use the example in the winter here in Colorado. We had somebody come into us that needed snow shoveling. So that's caregiving, finding support.
I think that's so interesting and so wise. I mean, you made two cool points. One is that sometimes there's a stigma around caregiving, and that's what we're here to kind of demystify today. Before we move on, have you felt that stigma in your own life?
Oh yeah, of course, of course. It's stigmatized and hard to talk about. At the ripe age of 24, I left Chicago to go back to Nebraska to help take care of my dad as a caregiver. And I, didn't identify as a caregiver at that time, nor did I want to talk about it with people. So I think that, it's stigmatized, but the more that we are open and honest and talk about caregiving and how it impacts us, mentally and physically, the better off as a society will be, and the better off, as employees and friends and family we become.
Yeah. I have that experience myself where I took care of my mom at a young adult age as well. And I didn't quite see myself as a caregiver to your earlier point. I saw myself as like the eldest daughter, which I think many can relate to. And it was my duty, it was my obligation to stop what I was doing. And my employer didn't necessarily agree with me at that time. And so I think it was a very difficult moment for me to see myself in a lot of different ways. I was a caregiver, I was a full-time corporate recruiter, and I was also a daughter and an older sister. And I carried a lot of these different roles. And mentally, it was absolutely challenging. And, I think about your other point around what isn't caregiving. Snow shoveling is a really great example. There are these small micro things we do for one another or we need from other people that fall into this caregiving bucket that I think would surprise us if we really thought about that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do. And think of that. And it's a story that I hear often when you talk about you just assume the role of being the eldest daughter. And I want to, bring up that 61% of caregivers are women. So it is something that we naturally fall into. We also see a lot of, we work with a lot of health systems, and we see a lot of healthcare workers that are tasked with being caregivers on top of their day jobs because of the nature that they're providing care within what they do. I also want to shout out those. If 61% of caregivers are women, we are in Men's Health Month in June. It's important to acknowledge that the men that go through the primary caregiving should be acknowledged because they're suffering in silence. And, they need a blueprint and a path and a helping partner to like Homethrive to help them navigate it. That's, I'm always pro women, but I want to.
Of course. Shout out to the dudes out there. I think it's really important. There are some stories in our chat right now in the comments, and we would encourage you to leave them. People saying, we're glad to be here, sharing their own individual stories around caring for parents, caring for loved ones. And it's this universal experience that I think more and more we're feeling comfortable discussing. So let's talk about like the stages of care, because very early on, we think of caregiving as like, caring for your parents or caring for your children, but it can start at a lot of different places. So when someone contacts you for help, for assistance, what's the vector that they normally come in through? Are they looking for help for their parents, or are they looking for help for their children? What's that like?
It's a split in both. I will say some growing areas that we are helping out with. I want to start with the parents, children with individual education plans, parents that have or suspect that their child might be neurodiverse. Where to start with that? Even, what kind of provider makes a diagnosis that gets the ball rolling with all of this? But we are also seeing a high amount of people coming in for support of parents that are suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, and how to navigate that, how to divide up duties between family or the other part of their care circle and loved ones. We see people that come in for support widely with that. with the aging loved ones. Also backup care. So, how do you show up and go to work when your child is sick or there's mismatched schedules, and then the growing support of after loss and death support.
Yeah. So someone has this need for caregiving support, and it's serious and it's important and it may be rocking their world or not. What do we expect as employees from our companies and from our leaders? And are those expectations even realistic in this marketplace?
Yeah. So I think a lot of companies that haven't adopted a program like Homethrive think that coverage like an EAP or a leave policy might help their employee navigate something. And while those are good to have, sometimes they are very surface level.
Yeah.
Or on the, topic of leave management, you're given this time off, whether it is FMLA or short-term disability, to provide care for somebody that you love or provide care for yourself, but you're not given a steward. You don't know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
So the efficiency and use and time that you have off, isn't always there for people to, navigate. For the, people that, or the companies that do provide our service, it's usually modeled at the top from leadership. And when it is modeled at the top that caregiving is important and caregiver support and providing support for yourself, that's where we see a lot of fantastic stories, fantastic utilization. And let's just say what it is. It's life-changing for people.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I feel like so many companies right now are jumping on the caregiver bandwagon and are being performative. But at the end of the day, companies exist for one of two reasons: to make money and to be profitable, right? And return an investment to shareholders or, premium members. And I think caregiving is something that they feel is a nice to have, but not a need to have. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I want to touch on what you said about performative, because I think about this often. Talking about caregiving at work is not the opposite of performative. It's raw, it's real. It's no longer a nice to have, it is a need to have, because it's the number 2 reason people are leaving the workforce behind retirement. It is a hard fact that it's a hard fact that it impacts women. There are studies that estimate that women who leave the workforce for caregiving personally lose $140-ish thousand in wages and $130-ish thousand in Social Security benefits. So any company that has any type of initiative to support women in leadership should realize that this is the need to have. Any company that is promoting mental health and well-being, there are great programs out there and employee benefits that are helping supplement it, but it's not solving the full story that, over 70% of your workforce is caregiving in some aspect, and you need to support them.
I think about the role of a manager here, not even just a high-level leader, but a role of a manager. And our managers are asked to do so much right now, right? They have their own full-time jobs. They have to manage the performance and the motivation of their workforce, right? Make sure communication is up and down the career ladder. And then on top of that, they're like, what? You want me to help somebody who's, going through grief or is dealing with the after effect of loss? They're just not equipped and not trained. So I wonder what messages you have for managers out there right now who are truly good people, but they're just overwhelmed and undertrained at this point. I don't know, Blair, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is a great question to bring up. And I think the managers need to be vulnerable and model behavior that it is okay to have, a psychologically safe conversation about what you're going through. We often see it. Sometimes I can say personally for myself, you are great at work, you're doing great at work. And then all of a sudden something starts being a little off. And oftentimes it's not a skill set thing. It is something that's impacting an employee from the outside. And if you can identify that and help direct them to a partner that is going to help them navigate the process, you at the core are building a non-performative loyalty partnership and really transforming the workforce into what it should be about people and getting away from that, capitalism, that you spoke to. You're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, we can integrate capitalism and care. And I think that's ultimately the goal here, to make money and to satisfy all the different constituencies who benefit from an organization, including the workforce. And, you brought up a really interesting point around the early signs that caregiving is taking a toll on a worker and how managers can be a little bit more attuned to that. I think about my own circumstance, just even the first time I had to leave the workforce and care for my mom. It's not like she wasn't sick leading up to this moment where she had a catastrophic event. She was not well. It was bothering me. It was something that was weighing on me. But, I never had a manager who said, I see something's on your mind. Do you want to talk about it? And I think fair, it was 1998. We didn't have these conversations. But I think now we're a little bit more mature and a little bit more sophisticated, and managers have permission to talk about these things. And I just wish my leader would have been a little bit braver and a little bit bolder and taken a risk with me. I don't know. Do you have any reflections on that? And do you have an experience like that?
I have reflection on that, and the fact that we offer to our clients management training and how to have these conversations and how to be vulnerable and how to uncover when somebody might be in need of caregiving help. And it could show up in something as simple as somebody continues to be late for work because they're taking somebody they love to dialysis and they can't get out in time back to clock in on time. So there are many different ways that it surfaces and ways that you can train your management teams on how to help uncover and facilitate conversations that lead to productive growth in the relationship, and also something that you can solve.
I want to take a break real quick just to let you know about a new show we've just added to the network. Up Next at Work, hosted by Gene and Kata Keel of the Devon Group. Fantastic show. If you're looking for something that pushes the norm, pushes the boundaries, has some really spirited conversations, Google Up Next at Work, Gene and Kata Keel from the Devon Group.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were talking how in the past, if a manager did kind of get clued into these things, or if an employee raised their hand and said, I'm currently struggling, the answer was first to go to HR and then to go to EAP. And oftentimes HR, myself, would work with the EAP because I wasn't necessarily trained in how to address this. So how is the experience different with Homethrive? Because there are so many people who have joined us today who are HR business partners or HR generalists or leaders of small businesses. And they're like, I don't know, that's what I have an EAP for.
Yeah, it's a great question. EAPs, I want to say, are good partners for us. So part of the implementation process is understanding what benefits that we can cross referral into each other. And EAPs do a nice job in some areas, but we find that they kind of scratch the surface with caregiving, where we go really deep with resolution and really one-on-one deep support. And there's no limit of times that people can work with us. Because I look at it this way too, Lori. Caregiving is very episodic for some. So things are great. Mom might have a fall. You need to help out intensively for 3 months. And then things are great again, for another year. There are other types of caregiving that are less episodic and more ongoing. And, that's where a program like ours works great because they support you through the process. And the deep dive that we go into, I can tell you, everybody comes to us with one thing on their mind. And as we start to work with our members, we uncover many more caregiving paths. I can guarantee if you're caregiving for one person, for one situation, you're the designated caregiver for somebody else at some other time. And you need to make sure that you navigate that correctly to help the people that you love, but also to protect your mental health and support yourself as the caregiver.
That's so well said. We talked about the vector, the way in which people often interact with Homethrive. They'll come in either for, an issue with their child or an issue with their parents. But caregiving is so nuanced, right? And I think about the partner who's supporting their spouse or their loved one who's lost a pregnancy, or someone who's supporting a partner who's currently going through menopause, right? And things are a little hectic around the house and they're confused. I want to get to the nuances of caregiving because I think like right now, a lot of organizations are like, okay, yeah, childcare, we're talking about it. Parental support with the sandwich generation, we're starting to have the conversations. But in between are all these aspects of caregiving that I think are getting lost in the conversation. Are you tracking with me here?
Yeah, I am. They are getting lost. So I'll give you an example. Seeing which caregiver comes in for help with their parents, but we find out their child is neurodivergent. We also find out that parent might be going through, or that woman, let's just say, might be going through menopause. That's a perfect time for us. I view our program as a navigator to look into the benefits guide that their employer is using and potentially find a menopause support partner that is already within their benefits ecosystem to help them navigate over. It becomes less overwhelming when you have that, strategic guide that helps you plug and play into those other things that you wouldn't traditionally associate with caregiving, but it is, you need to support yourself medically, emotionally, physically, spiritually to be able to continue to provide care for others.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your own caregiving journey, and I think about mine. And whether you're supporting someone in the midst of, a chronic condition or addiction or whatever the case, there's also this element of finance that gets involved, right? Most of us are working for a reason. We're not born with a silver spoon in our mouths, right? We're working to support ourselves, to build wealth, to save for retirement, to support our families. And then a critical or catastrophic event happens in our life that may be chronic and ongoing. And suddenly it's not just that we're caring for another person, but we're thinking about our own finances in the mix, right? So I want to talk a little bit about you and how you've seen this play out either in your own life or with clients, and maybe how Homethrive addresses that issue as well.
Yeah, I can tell you I've seen it play out in myself personally, taking PTO days to take care of loved ones. Caregiving is expensive too. When my brother started addressing his addiction, he would live with me. So, I'm paying his rent, I'm paying his bills, his everything that he eats, his groceries, and those things add up. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I absolutely loved being there to support him. But as a, single income, that starts to add up for you. And I think about this and I hear, because I travel quite often for my job, I eavesdrop in the airport, and every time I'm there, I hear somebody talking about caregiving. And you think about how costly does it get when you have to get on a plane to travel across country to caregive for a loved one? And how often are you doing that? And, where is your support system there? So it can manifest in many different ways. I also think about doctor's appointments. What if you have to see a specialist that is out of network, and how are you going to pay for that? Who is going to pay for that? We work with a lot of people that finance, is a huge issue for their loved ones, aging loved ones. Like, where are the community resources that we can help you uncover for lower, no cost options, and what support is available? Because caregiving gets costly very quick.
It sure does. And many of us don't have this concierge style approach to navigating the ins and outs of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, employer benefits. Like there is a web of benefits along with our normal employer benefits that are out there. And it can be very confusing and very overwhelming. And can you talk a little bit about how Homethrive tries to help their clients navigate all this?
Yeah, I want to talk on Medicare real quick because it is a great area for us. Medicare is one of our biggest funnels. People come in to work with our Medicare team for their loved ones or themselves if they're getting close to Medicare eligibility age. And then they find all the other resources that we offer and do and start working this in other ways. But, you said it, and I think coming from an HR space, like Medicare is something that benefits teams are not really versed in. There's also a liability for them to give guidance information. So whenever somebody at any of our clients, an employee goes to their HR team and says Medicare, they just basically pass them directly over to Homethrive. So I wanted to make sure that I share that because we haven't touched on Medicare yet. And our Medicare team is phenomenal. The stories that they do going back to cost with helping people's loved ones compare plans and understand, different prescriptions they're on and what makes the most sense for them. I get calls and people, very tearful about how, they saved their parents X amount and this helps them in their caregiving journey and they're grateful.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I think most people hear the word Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security and start to black out at this point. So it's amazing that you offer that kind of benefit. I'm thinking about the small business owner or the HR leader who knows they have this need in their workforce to wrap their arms around caregiving because it's happening piecemeal and they're doing their level best, right? I think all of us, when faced with workers who are struggling, really try. We really do. When they come to Homethrive and say, we need help as an organization, what's that experience like?
It's understanding what we need help means to them. It could be manifesting in leave issues that they're seeing. It could be manifesting in turnover issues. So it's really, understanding where that's at. And we dig in on multiple levels, not only with the benefits teams, the HR teams, but we sit with employee resource groups and affinity groups and, listen to the themes and needs that are there and build out, a custom plan and messaging and, really learning how to connect people into our program that would be meaningful, not only to the employees, but make a business impact at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what this is all about, making sure that people feel cared for, they feel productive as well when they do return to work, they feel supported, they feel cared for. Can you talk a little bit about the ROI of caregiving? Because again, a lot of cynical people out there who are like, yeah, this is all well and good, but even if we do bring this program in, it's just for employer branding, right? Or this doesn't really work. And I want to know, is there an ROI to really prioritizing caregiving?
There is an ROI to prioritizing caregiving. So one thing that we offer all of our clients is where I really see the magic of this is weaving in the benefit with leave management and really measuring how long people take off when they work with us, benchmarked compared to when they're not working with us and stories from that. There's also an ROI that comes up with testimonials and people talking about save time. And, I think about this too, because I've been a caregiver before and you might be in a meeting physically, but mentally you're not there. So there's lost work there. There's ROI in a lot of different places. It's depending on, how you want to measure it. We have a lot of law firms. I mean, that's the easiest ROI, billable hours.
Yeah.
So one of our great law firm partners shared a story with me recently about how one of the partners said, not only did Homethrive save me this much time that I could turn into billable hours, but they found resources I wouldn't even think to have uncovered. And so, that in itself pays for the program, when you have a time, in that. And we see that too in our manufacturing clients with, taking sick time off to take care of a child that, if there was a backup care option in place, or when we do put a backup care option in place, that helps, mitigate that loss. I think about it too with after loss support. It takes up to 15 months to close out people's estates, and the average bereavement time is 3 to 5 days. And we all know that, when you are helping close out estates and taking care of loved ones after you lose somebody, that 3 to 5 days is nothing.
Remember that feeling the first day of school, looking for your table in the cafeteria? Do you know anybody? Where are you supposed to sit? You don't know, but you definitely feel like there's toilet paper on the bottom of your shoe. Ugh, this is the worst. Well, you know what they say, high school never ends. I'm Anna Morgan, former corporate recruiter turned entrepreneur, and I know the workforce can feel just as complicated and cliquey as high school. Trust me, I've been there. The layoffs, the imposter syndrome, the what the hell am I doing moments at 3 a.m. It all brought one point into focus. We all deserve a place to belong and learn. So I started this podcast just for us. Welcome to your Career BFF podcast, a place where everyone has a seat at the table, complete with masterclasses, no BS advice, and candid conversations with some of my favorite people. It's the Breakfast Club meets the boardroom. So whether you're the rebel challenging the status quo, the brain strategizing your next move, or the quiet wizard making magic behind the scenes, you have a seat. So grab your backpack, find your spot, and get ready to learn, laugh, and lead together. Because in this classroom, everyone's got a BFF. Class starts soon. See you there. Bye.
What if I told you that your boss skydives, Tim in marketing is a magician, and Sam in accounting does sums in his head while standing on his hands? Seeing sides of the people you work with but never see, sides that inform and inspire their work and that can inspire yours, is what The Talent Show is all about. Email me, Tom Alexander, host of The Talent Show, at talentshow@backboneinc.com, and show us what you got. I look forward to seeing you on The Talent Show.
No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. I think about in terms of ROI, just this overall feeling not only of disconnection, but people who 6 months, 8 months, 10 months down the road are still kind of immersed in what happened to their stories. So I wonder if part of the approach with caregiving at Homethrive is to recognize that a caregiving event, even if it's a one-time event, doesn't just happen today, but it can linger throughout an employee's entire work experience. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it can linger throughout the experience because it's rarely a one-time event. And as I've mentioned before, when you become a caregiver and you're seen as a caregiver to your friends and family, they start coming to you for other things and care in general too. So it does linger, it does impact it. Caregiving is deeply intertwined with mental health. You can't solve for mental health without solving for caregiving. You can't solve for caregiving without solving for mental health. So it is never a one-time thing.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat, and it is just absolutely popping. All of you who are sharing your very personal stories, thank you so much. I mean, there's a lot of different ways people have been caregivers or received care. And I actually have 2 people who are currently participating and watching this LinkedIn Live who are my bosses who have been caregivers, and they were wonderful, compassionate bosses, but both are men. And so I think it's really interesting to talk a little bit and go back to the earlier part of the conversation about how while caregiving is primarily done by women in our economy, the numbers for men aren't insignificant either, right, Blair?
They're not. And I want to loudly say our company was founded by 2 male caregivers. So they were going through caregiving themselves and very successful executives. And they were impacted by their caregiving journey and realized that there wasn't something out there that, was a solution. And that inspired them to start Homethrive. So yeah, it's not lost on me. And I think about it often. As much as I am a big champion of helping women become greater leaders and achieve their goals, again, I want to state it's very important for us to acknowledge the men caregivers in our lives and make sure that they are not suffering in silence and they feel supported and have, a path to help them in their caregiving journey as well.
I think that's right on the money. And, caregiving can be so isolating. We've had that comment in our chat over and over again repeatedly that this can be an isolating experience. And then being told that you don't look like a traditional caregiver can further that isolation. So I like the idea that we are including men in this conversation and that men are a part of not only the caregiving topic, but part of the solution as well. I love a man who is involved in his family and what's going on, right? I think that's very noble and very wise. And the fact that there are examples not only in our chat, but in our lives of that is really inspiring. So I don't know, Blair, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I have a great client that sees a need for this too. And they recently had a panel where they had fathers of autistic children speak. And it was just touching to see that and have their voices raised. And I think about it, the more we talk about caregiving, the less stigmatized it becomes, the more people realize that, hey, everybody is going through some type of caregiving journey at some point in their life, or they're going to need a caregiver, the more we'll be able to make an impact and help.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It has been such a taboo topic for so long. And while I'm glad to see it out there in the media, here on LinkedIn, people talking about caregiving all over, why do you think it's taken until 2025 for many of these conversations to happen? Like, why has it been taboo for so long?
I think 1, we go back to people don't recognize themselves as caregivers. And 2, workforces are very performative. People are performative. The opposite of performative is, being raw with your feelings and what you're going through personally and, where your caregiving's at. So it's not always something easy for people to talk about. And it's not always something that is modeled at the top. When it is modeled at the top, it changes workforce cultures and it helps people.
Well, you mentioned about the founders of Homethrive being two men, two individuals who really struggled with caregiving needs and caregiving resources. Can we talk a little bit about how that modeling at the top truly makes a difference? Like, I don't know that I've ever had at the executive level leaders talk about their caregiving needs. What happens when that conversation starts there?
So it is a great question. We were implementing a client and their chief people officer at a town hall meeting spoke about her child who had profound disabilities and navigating that. And her child is now an adult, but all of what she had to go through on her own and how if she had a program like Homethrive supporting her, how it would have, helped her immensely personally, career growth, having boundaries. And within that town hall hour, we had over 400 people sign up to become members. And that story still just gives me chills because that is somebody modeling vulnerability at top, saying it's okay to say that you need help. There is help out there that can help you navigate the situation that you're in. And we as an organization support you.
Paige in our comments just left a comment and said, sometimes people don't talk about this because they might be scared of death. Death is a taboo topic. So I don't know, what do you think about that?
Death is a very taboo topic. It's hard for people to talk about. It's hard for people to be vulnerable about. The majority of us don't even have wills in place. So the preparation for death as a society is not there. And I find it really interesting. Some of the resource groups that we work within have brought to my attention the cultural differences in how people approach death and culturally how, people prepare or don't prepare for death. So it's not uncommon for it to, continue to not be something that people feel comfortable talking about. I think it just goes back to vulnerability and, death is something that can't be avoided. So the more we talk about shared experiences and that there are real solutions out there helping people, the less stigmatized it becomes.
I also think we're in a weird part of our global story with our economy where many people feel not psychologically safe at work. They feel like economic pressures are weird. And to be vulnerable at work, especially around caregiving, means to put yourself in a situation where you're not feeling like the dominant individual at the office, right? So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about what's happening in the world and maybe how that might be affecting what goes on with people feeling vulnerable and raising their hand and saying, I need care.
Yeah. Well, one, I want to state because I'm a very vulnerable person about my caregiving journey, but members can work with us and not shout from the rooftop about it. It's modeling from the top that it's there. But the reality of the economy that we're in is that people are expected to do more, often with less pay or very little pay raises, less team, less resources. And so it is every factor outside of work that is stressing them that there's a solution for that helps them with that work-life balance, is something worth investing and looking into.
I really think I want to nail on this a little bit more, like drill down a little bit on this more, because I think that intersection of financial stability and caregiving is really important to talk about. And so we've had a couple of comments. I've had some people ping me really talking about how it's hard to raise your hand and say, I need help, when many of us are living paycheck to paycheck or really need our benefits, or we're scared that if we take time off, it somehow will ding us on our performance management program going forward. So when an organization has Homethrive in place, I think it's really important to talk about the confidentiality of your experience with Homethrive and what's being communicated to your employer. Can you speak to that?
I can speak to that since I run our client success department. Everything is confidential and private. We have people that will send us emails and say, I don't want this to be private. I want to share my story. I want to scream it from the rooftop.
Sure.
And we'll gladly take those testimonials in and work with people, because that becomes such a great driver for others to work with us, obviously. But everything is completely confidential, and it's confidential within your family too. We have people that work with us that their loved ones don't know they're working with us for support. We have people that work with us that have the person they're supporting on the phone with them. So there's many different ways to approach how to tackle caregiving, and there's no correct way. It's the correct way for the member, but everything is completely confidential. Aggregate wise, we love sharing data on how people are working with us, because it shows employers where our message is resonating. And then it shows areas where we could potentially improve on messaging if we're seeing gaps in how people are using us.
I would imagine it's a little bit more comfortable to work with Homethrive or just exist in an organization when you have that feeling of psychological safety. So talk about your experience actually being an employee at Homethrive. Like, what does it feel like? Are you comfortable raising your hand? What's it like to, walk the talk, to drink your own champagne?
Yeah. I like that. I always say Kool-Aid, but I'm going to start saying champagne for myself.
Yeah. Well, some people say eat your own dog food, and I don't like that. I don't think that sounds great.
However you say it, I feel very fortunate to have landed here. I've been with Homethrive for a little bit over 2 years, and from day one, I've been given the space to grow out my department. I've been given the opportunity to be a thought leader within the organization, outside the organization. I love managing a team and building out psychological safety and helping them grow, not only as, thrivers, as we like to call it, but understanding how they each individually want to grow as people, what's important to them, all those good things. So I love people management, and I've been very fortunate here at Homethrive.
Well, it sounds like workers and employees are allowed to have this multidimensional life. And I think that's so important with caregiving, when we stop talking about it as like this event and just start to have it in the conversation as a life experience. Something we'll either do for someone, we'll be caregivers for someone, or we will receive care. I think you're on this really interesting mission to normalize the conversation. So I don't know, when it becomes part of a normal conversation, it seems less scary. It seems less daunting. And it seems like you have a team then to help you and support you. But I don't know, am I just a dreamer? Am I crazy?
No, I think it's a great point. And it's, at the core, it's part of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think about how we provide care for ourselves. We spend a lot of time talking about what, to eat right, to exercise, to grow ourselves. But on the opposite side of that coin is we're caregiving for others at the same time. So, they go hand in hand, and it's part of who we are at our core. We're caring people.
Visionary voices, bold breakthroughs. This is Shally's Alley, where top recruiting minds spill their best-kept secrets live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Raw, unfiltered conversations on sourcing, hiring, and the future of talent, where we ask the tough questions no one else will. Tune in and level up.
We've seen some comments, and I've received some private pings that people are like, yeah, it's great to talk about the ups of caregiving, but I've got a terrible story with my employer, right? I mean, we're rife with those discussions, but I think it's important to show when an employer does it right and what it can look like. So do you have any really standout stories, other standout stories that come to mind where, a company is doing it and they've maybe not nailed it, but they're a model for what this could look like?
Yeah, I do. And don't want to share client names because of confidentiality. But, the success stories that we have is when, like I said at the beginning, when we embed in different parts of the organization. So not only in the benefits and leave management, but I'm a huge advocate for being involved in employee resource groups, affinity groups. I think caregiving is done at a community level. And I challenged myself when I started at Homethrive. What is the community level within these organizations? And they are these resource groups, whether they meet in person or hybrid or completely virtual. There's a lot of caregiving that intersects with all of these groups. And, how can we help them in their mission and in their topics they're covering and in their growth in these resource groups address the caregiving needs? And again, how can we sit with them and learn from them? Because oftentimes in the more diverse resource groups, people are disproportionately impacted by caregiving. And we have one client that has us plugged into all of it. And we've just become a fan. We have multiple clients we're plugged in all, but I'm thinking of one specific client where we've become a great partner. They even launched a new benefit about 6 months after us. And they asked if they could take our implementation blueprint and apply it to that benefit. And we felt so honored when they said that because, it's reciprocal. We know it's working for both of us. And I really hope that, that blueprint is working for them with their new benefit partner as well, too.
Yeah, I hope so as well. You had mentioned to me privately offline that you've worked in the benefit industry your whole career. And you were like, why have I not thought of Homethrive on my own, right? It's such a really good idea. But talk to me about the evolution of benefits because, I started working in HR in 1995. And back then, benefits was like healthcare, dental, and vision, right?
Yep.
And a pension if you worked in a union environment. So I'd love to know what you've seen as the trajectory and how this industry is changing and whether or not there's more opportunity in the future to talk about caregiving and a whole host of other topics.
Yeah, I love that question because it's so important. And it was very plug and play back in the day when I started. And you see this evolution of benefits in the mental health space, in the well-being spaces, another, in the women's health space, you're seeing benefits evolve in childcare space. And I find as, especially when you look at it generationally, younger generations are expecting more out of their employers in their benefits, and not only more in guidance, but more in specificity in how companies are directing them and helping them with things that they are struggling with outside the traditional medical, dental, vision. Those are core things that every company needs to have. But the ones that separate themselves from a cultural perspective really go above and beyond and look into the more bespoke benefits. And it's been an interesting evolution to see. And I honestly think caregiving is part of that pack of the evolution. And when you look at where mental health benefits were like 5 to 10 years ago, because that used to be taboo to talk about.
Yeah.
Caregiving is following that trajectory, that path. I now no longer fear saying something to my manager about going to therapy, where 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like Gen X crawled so Gen Z could walk. We talk a lot about these generational expectations around, benefits around caregiving. And it's not like previous generations didn't have expectations and demands. And there's been this really interesting, I think, evolution of what work means and what work should become for people. And this younger generation that's emerging has just a different concept of what it means to show up regularly and contribute and what they should expect from an employer. So caregiving being part of the mix makes sense to me because they're just brazen. They're just saying it out loud, right? It's just a different vibe that we get from these younger workers. But I just wanted to debunk this idea that older workers didn't want this because we wanted it. We were just told no, that your caregiving is something that happens on your private time. What do you think about that?
I think that's so well said. It was something that happened on your private time, but the reality is it's not. It's something that people are making phone calls to find, housing options for their aging loved ones during the day and, placing calls, getting calls back, talking to healthcare providers. So there's that time away that people are actually taking at work, but there's also the distracted time at work. As I've mentioned, there have been plenty of times when I'm thick in a caregiving journey personally where I'm physically at work, I'm sitting in a meeting, I am in a room, but mentally I'm not there.
Yeah.
So I really want to shout loud that, yes, the way we used to view this was caregiving is done outside of work, outside of, this time. But the reality is the complete opposite. It is done 24/7. It is nonstop.
Sure. Well, as we start to wrap up the conversation, we've had just this robust chat that's going on right now. I mean, it's really interesting. I've been getting pinged. I know, Blair, you're probably getting pinged. I want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that Homethrive has for free on the website. So maybe you're not a member of Homethrive, maybe your employer doesn't have it, but Homethrive is still there for you. So what's up on the website?
Yeah, so we have different resources on how to elevate a conversation with your HR about our program. So I want to start there. I'm also available to have talks with how to elevate if you are not in the HR space on how to navigate that. We also have great webinars for our members and non-members that we host on a monthly basis that help people navigate. So I always encourage people, even if your employer doesn't offer this, join one of our webinars, sign up. We always send recordings and we have very meaningful conversations from, how to prepare for summer travel with a loved one that has disabilities to a lot of navigating Medicare is a very popular one. And, the more sensitive topics that, revolve around, helping a loved one with memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's, et cetera. So the webinars are a great resource, even if you're not a client personally for you and, for your employees.
Well, I want to, as we start to wrap up this conversation, make sure we also talk about some of the joy of caregiving, because we often frame this discussion as something that's really painful. There's a lot going on. There's a ton of nuance, but there's absolutely something really beautiful and lovely about either spending time with someone who needs us or reconnecting with a loved one or being there in the moment that adds to the complexity and just the depth of the human experience. So as I say that, do you have any thoughts about that? Any reactions? Like how caregiving can be as beautiful as it is taxing?
It is beautiful. And I encourage people to, really sit with the beautifulness of being a caregiver and help, let Homethrive handle some of the operational stuff that isn't beautiful or easy to navigate. But it is part of the human experience to, deepen relationships and, grow as people and continue to help others.
I think about my own caregiving story with my mom. And one of the things she said to me recently was just how grateful she was that when I was 23, I took time off work and that even though she was very sick, we were able to have these moments of just quiet and being together in her hospital room. It was, I don't know, it was tough, but we connected on a deeper, much deeper level. And she's incredibly grateful for it. And it makes me feel as if, okay, this was a tough experience to have, but I'm so grateful that I was there for her in those moments. It makes me feel proud. It makes me love her more. It makes me grateful she survived that incident, right? So when you talk about your own caregiving stories, do you have any reflections like that?
Yeah, I want to say first that's very beautiful and never underestimate your interactions and helping people and what they will mean to them and or yourselves when you look back. So yeah, I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I helped my brother address his alcohol addiction. And there were some tough love moments. There were some, financial constraints, but now he is 5+ years sober. He got a 4.0 in his Master's of Healthcare Administration program. He is my dog and cat sitter when I travel on the road. And so, it adds a level of depth thinking about the caregiving that we've gone through together and the beauty of where we're at now.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are resonating with those comments saying, soak up the one-on-one time, the stories and the love. And I think that's absolutely true. Well, listen, Blair, it's been a real joy to connect with you today, to hear your story, to learn about caregiving, to debunk some of the myths, and to actually talk about those good moments where we can reconnect with our family and take care of one another and not worry about the burden of work. So thank you for being just so authentic and so transparent today.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. It's been a pleasure.
Hey everybody, that's it for today's episode of Punk Rock HR. But if you'd like to learn more about supporting working caregivers or bringing Homethrive into your organization, you can visit our show notes, connect with Blair Whitman on LinkedIn, or visit homethrive.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe, or share it with someone who may benefit from it. Big thanks to Blair Whitman for the conversation and to the team at RepCat for their production support. I'm Lori Rudiman. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Punk Rock HR.